In fact, I lived on a commune, like many others, a hippie commune, for just a short period, but it was like work together, shared together, equality, equal ownership, that type of thing.
For me, the revolution is over. I'm living my life. I'm living in an alternative culture, and I feel that the only successful way that the revolution ever can be over is for more and more people to just drop out and start living alternative lifestyles, start living on the land, out of the big cities. Living isn't all about attending classes. You live. We each learn from and teach each other.
It's the same philosophy as Eastern communism, but with one huge difference. In Eastern communism, remember there was the East-West wall they put up to divide Berlin. Remember that? The East-West wall they put up? And this big wall across Berlin divided in two.
The Freedom Bell in West Berlin tolls in sympathy for East Germans on the first anniversary of the Wall of Shame that holds them prisoners. It was just a year ago that authorities in communist Germany, appalled at the numbers who were fleeing to the west, threw up the wall. East German boss Ulbricht cut worshippers from their churches, separated parents from their children. U.S. patrols check a segment of the 95-mile-long barrier. The slogan of the day among the West Berliners is marked on the cross, "We accuse." They march along the wall, a display of silent contempt for communist efforts to imprison their friends and relatives.
Well, it was put up by Eastern communism, not Western communism, that hippiedom was involved in. We were involved in Western communism, not Eastern communism. Big difference. Remember the Berlin Wall they put up? Well, that was put up to keep people in, not to keep people out, to keep people in. To keep people in those communist countries. In fact, if you try to escape out of that communist world, you could be shot. You know, Eastern communism is dictatorial, and it ostracized you if you didn't follow the rules. You know, you could be purged or jailed or, you know, really given a hard time if you didn't follow those rules. You were forced to live by their communist philosophies. In fact, the only way that they could communicate was to make a prearranged time for different family members who are on the east side of the wall and family members who are on the west side of the wall. And the reason that there was often a radical reaction to the hippie world, to the hippie revolution, to the hippie philosophy, if you like, in the West, particularly in the United States.
I want to rid ourselves of these communists. Why don't we do it? Yes, they're traitors to America. Why don't we do something about it? They are enemies. They are not Americans.
Yeah,
why don't we do it?
They're communists!
And the reason was because that hippies lived in communes and clearly had a communist philosophy about life, equal sharing and all that sort of thing. And that scared people in the US, and they reacted to it. They didn't like it because they thought, oh no, communism is coming to us. But they didn't understand it was a major difference between the East and West communism. The truth was they were really actually misinformed, and their judgment about the hippie movement was incorrect. Because the huge difference between the communism of the East and communism of the West, I mean, we call it communism. The hippie movement had this communist flavour about it, but it was entirely different type of setup to Eastern communism. And the big difference was that Eastern communism was compulsory and you were forced to abide by their rules. Mao Zedong Communist Cultural Revolution, which was another revolution that was happening at the same time as well. Mao Zedong Cultural Revolution in China was happening in the late 60s, early 70s as well. It was really powering on there, right in the middle of all these other revolutions as well. But his revolution demanded that everyone live by this little red book that he put out.
Mao first learned about power in childhood quarrels with his father, and he learned that defiance paid off, and that his father would compromise and he could have almost his own way. Later he studied a German philosopher named Paulson, who believed that there was power in every individual. If you could release that human power, you could move a nation. Finally, Mao summed up his whole philosophy in a famous phrase, saying, "Power flows from the barrel of a gun," and he lived by that prescription.
Many observers speculate that China, not the Soviet Union, poses the greatest threat to the free nations of the West. This theory is borne out by the words of Mao Zedong. The Chinese people will see, he said, that once their destiny is in the hands of the Communist Party, China, like the rising sun in the east, will flood the world with its rays.
It was distributed to everybody, and they had to live by this little red book. And if they didn't, then they would be chastised and beaten. So Eastern communism was forced communism. People were demanded to live by those rules under Eastern communism. And in contrast, the Western communism, if you like, the hippie philosophy, was what we could call democratic communism. Democratic communism. Eastern communism was forced communism. Our communism was, we could term, democratic communism. Because Western communism, if you like, you want to call it that name, was by personal choice. I could leave the commune anytime I wanted. Your individual rights were never compromised. Your right to choice was never violated. And that's what democracy is. That your personal rights are upheld. And that's what the hippie philosophy was. Individual freedom of expression without rules.
And start living alternative lifestyles. Start living on the land, out of the big cities, out of contact with the government, away from the coercive agencies of government, police, engineering boards, city planners, city governments, tax collectors. And it can be done. People can do it. We have hassles right here, but we live a 100% less restricted life than the average citizen does, and that we do as we want, the way we want it, and we feel our responsibility towards each and every person as a brother and as a sister.
But of course the hippie philosophy was far more encompassing than Eastern communism, because the welfare of the whole human race was our concern. That was a major part of the hippie philosophy. We were concerned about the entire planet, about everybody, about the Chinese, Russians, everybody. That's why we started Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and the Clean Air Act of 1970, the Marine Protection Society, the anti-nuclear movement, the water pollution control. We even started the International Federation of Organic Culture in 1972. No, the hippie philosophy was actually for the good of all mankind. It never took away your individual choice. You know, in contrast, the Mao Zedong Chinese Cultural Revolution of the 1970s, 5 million people died of starvation. There's a major difference between these two philosophies. And so here we are in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and there are revolutions going on everywhere. As I said, there's the Chinese Mao Zedong Cultural Revolution that was taking place and now is started reaching its tentacles into Africa. There was the hippie revolution, which tended to move you towards the well-being of others. You know, that's the idea of the hippie revolution. But the trouble is, it makes you vulnerable to people as well. People can easily take advantage of you, you know, and commit skullduggery towards you because you're wanting to be nice to them, and you don't know what people are going to respond like. You know, whereas you had the best intentions, but often other people didn't have the best intentions. So it could easily be very risky operating in the hippie philosophy during that time as well. It was all very nice to be a hippie, but operating in the hippie philosophy in these foreign countries could be your undoing as well. And of course there was the worldwide communist domination revolution of the USSR, or the Soviet Union, happening at that time. The communist domination that we saw of the Baltic states and East Germany and all that sort of thing was known as the Cold War. That was raging at the same time. And of course there was the, as I mentioned before, the anti-colonialism revolution, mainly found in the continent of Africa during those times. But it was a highly volatile, brutal and murderous revolution. So you have all these revolutions going on all around us at this particular time in history. And also during that time, the surfing revolution was in full swing. And adventure and lifestyle and fun, you know, that type of thing became a component of our lifestyle as well, a component of our daily routine. Fun and adventure and lifestyle. You know, so people highly underestimate the surfing revolution of the 1960s. And I think personally that the surfing revolution of the 1960s has been the greatest revolution of any revolution, greatest revolution of all time, except for religion, I must say that. Greatest revolution of all time apart from religion. And things that were incubated during that massive surfing lifestyle growth period of the 1960s really had a serious, major global impact on this world, like we've never seen before, and I'll explain it to you. For instance, not only did that produce surfboards, we were making surfboards, you know, ended up becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry, surfboards itself, that surfboard industry, but surfing spread its wings far and wide in so many different areas by innovation and necessity. Necessity. For instance, I used to go surfing in 1959. I started surfing, go surfing, and I would be freezing cold in the winter because there was no such thing as wetsuits. So what do we have to do? We have to invent wetsuits, and that's what surfers did. Surfers invented the current wetsuits that you are wearing today. Surfers invented them. O'Neill, you know, Rip Curl, all those brand names are invented by surfers in the early 1960s who got cold and needed a wetsuit to wear. And I remember making myself a wetsuit in 1962. It was horrible, but it did the job. And so necessity caused the surfing revolution to invent wetsuits. And now it's a multi-billion dollar industry in every country worldwide. You've probably even worn a wetsuit that was developed back there in the early 1960s during the surfing revolution.